Welcome to this webinar about indication training and how to train a passive indication. What we will start with is just an overview of the different steps when it comes to detection training. But remember that the indication training that I will talk about during this webinar is something that you can, of course, also use for your tracking dog. But I would like to start with a little bit of a background and an overview of the different modules in detection training, because what I can see as the most common problem is that people tend to train the indication too early in the process, which can create a lot of problems that you have to deal with later on, and sometimes for the rest of the dog's career. So that's the reason why I want to show you this picture. It all starts, of course, with selection of a dog. And for detection dogs and tracking dogs, we prefer dogs with a high prey drive. In lack of a better term, prey drive is not, I think, the best way to describe the motivation that kind of drives the detection dog and tracking dog. But yeah, in lack of a better term, what we want is a dog who is highly motivated to chase after the toy, to grab it and to keep it, because all of those parts will be important for not only the indication training, but also what we call the search development training. When we have selected the dog, and I should say also that we look for dogs that are motivated not only for the toy rewards, but also, of course, food rewards, because normally you do different things, several things with the same dog. Obedience and bite work, for example, and so on. But for the detection training, we want dogs who are highly interested in the toy, because it makes the process and the training so much easier. So once we have selected that dog, we start up the first part of the training, which is the reward development, and that can go on for quite some time, of course, depending on how the dog is prepared, how young it is, and so on. But during the reward development, what we do is just to try and increase that drive and that motivation for the reinforcers even more. Then we start the search development training. Search development training is something that goes on in two phases. The first one is where we just connect the play with the search. So we turn the chasing games into a search. And during that time, the dog just search for his toy, his favorite toy, and will be allowed to grab that toy, play with it. And that's how we start up the search training. So when we have a dog who can search for a toy, his favorite toy then, for quite a long time, I used to say that in average 20, 25, 30 minutes, of course, depends on what you expect from that dog and what he's supposed to be used for later on. But it's important to come to a certain point where you can see that the dog clearly doesn't stop searching or lose intensity and so on. So I think it's good to aim for around 20 minutes. And 20 minutes means that the dog should be able to search and continue to search before he finds the toy, for around 20 minutes on average. And then we enter the next phase of search development, and this is where we focus more on how the dog is searching, because in the first part of the training we don't care how the dog is searching. We just want him to understand that his reinforcer is out there in the search area. In the second phase, we start up the detailed search, and the detailed search is where we get the intensity of the sniffing, and where we build up the stamina and endurance, and focus more on that high sniffing frequency. And also there, it's important to come to a point where the dog can search for example, on a brick wall, which is the first part of that search development phase, for 10-15 minutes, and during that time we just reward the dog's reaction. We don't care about any kind of indication. So once we have reached those 10-15 minutes, then we can start up the indication training. And the reason for waiting with that is, of course, that we risk to get an unbalance, because search detection is all about searching and finding. And most of the time in real life, the dogs will be searching for, most of the time searching, and sometimes, or some dogs might almost never find something. So that's why we need to build up that motivation for searching. But if we do too much indication training and too little search training, the dog might expect to find something really quick. So the reason why we have those numbers or minutes for the search development phase is just to be sure that we have a dog who has developed the search drive before we connect it with the indication. The indication training, though, can be trained earlier than this when it comes to some of the exercises that you can do that has nothing to do with searching or even indicating, but it's just a way to prepare the dog for being focused, for example. And those exercises you can start much earlier, but the full indication training, and especially when we're connected with the search, we have to wait with. But once we have a dog who can search for a long time and now has the indication behavior, then we can start to use those foundations in systematic search, which means that now the dog should be able to apply these techniques in different search patterns, in different environments, and so on. So what we mean with foundations are reward development, search development, and indication training. And after that comes systematic search and imprinting. So when can I start the indication training? Well, I've mentioned a few examples already, but you should be able to play intense for at least 5 minutes with the flirt pole or other types of chasing games, because that it will be a sign that the dog has the motivation that it takes for that toy. He should be able to search for the whole toy in high grass in different environments for at least 20 minutes. And he should be able to perform a detailed search without interruptions or decreased intensity for 10-15 minutes. And also, he has to handle leash tension. And what we mean with leash tension, you will see several examples of this during this webinar. But what we mean is that the dog should, the leash and the leash tension will be so important in the indication training, but also in the search development training, that he has to respond to that leash tension in the right way. So if the leash stopping the leash means a restriction or correction or basically just stop, that will be a problem. So we have to train what we call resistance to leash tension to get that drive forward. And this doesn't mean that the dog will not be able to walk on a leash without pulling the leash. This will be contextual learning, where the dog easily learn that pulling leash is okay in this type of training. In other types of training, you don't want them. So that's not the problem. So the exercises that we do before the indication training is chasing games. I will show you a video of this soon. Resistance to leash tension, and that's something that we can do in the chasing games, where we gradually can add some tension on the leash, conditioning the dog, or conditioning the leash tension, meaning for the dog that when you get tension, you should move forward, you shouldn't stop. And search development on the brick wall or something similar. And then another exercise where we shape the actual indication training, indication behavior, in this case, is sit and stare, through an exercise called active passive. And active passive is built on the chasing games. So these are the exercises. And in reward development, there are different ideas about prey drive, and if it is necessary to have a dog with a lot of that for detection. I'm convinced that if the dog has to do some quite tough job over longer periods of time in harsh conditions and so on, yes, I think that drive will be necessary, because it's no doubt there are you can train any dog to perform these different skills, even with a dog who doesn't have motivation for the toy at all. It will be on low intensity, but also remember that low intensity, even though it is relative, is often a mirror of the dog's drive and motivation. So through play and through that prey drive and chasing games, we can build up a toughness that I find very difficult to develop in other ways. But also, this type of play makes it possible to start training the indication training during play, because focus is a main component of chasing games and the prey drive. So during play, we can actually start the indication training in parallel to the search training without, connecting them. So what we do when we do chasing games is to, through a play that is focused around the toy, trigger the dog to follow and try to catch that toy. And when he catches the toy, he will learn to keep it hard, because otherwise he will lose it. The reason for this, and why it's more important for detection dogs than for many other types of training, is that the whole motivation will be built around the toy itself. And as you all know, in detection training and tracking training, there is always risk for what we call handler influence. And if we also connect our rewards with social expectation, we can increase that risk. So during the chasing games, we kind of direct the dog's focus and attention and motivation to the toy instead of the handler. But it's then important to understand the principles with chasing games, so that we can direct that into the toy already from start. Distance is one important part. And what I mean with distance is the distance between the dog and the toy. So the closer we are able to keep the toy during play, the more it will trigger the prey drive. So what happened then is that the dog feels that he has a chance to catch it. But if it's too far away, then the dog will become passive. When the dog finds or grabs the toy, we need to keep on doing almost random movement, small twitching, and then relax, let the dog keep the toy, small twitching again, so the dog learns that if he doesn't hold it hard enough, he will lose it. Focus and leash tension in the start, which means that we place the toy close to the dog. We add some tension before we move the toy, so the dog learns that tension means focus forward. And that will be very helpful for the rest of the training, both in search development, where we use that tension to condition a start signal, and for the indication training, which is all about focus. And then the attitude, the toughness that I talked about, is something that we can start to add to the play by adding some tension during play, so the dog has to pull a little bit harder and be tougher to catch the toy. In general, I play with my dogs 1 or 2 sessions every day. Play is also very good fitness training, and especially the chasing games. When we start up the play development, this is the first exercise that we do. And this is with food. And it gives you and the dog the possibility to learn the mechanics and the principles on lower speed, lower intensity level. But also it develops, of course, the food rewards, so that you can use food rewards in different ways on different intensity levels. So it looks like this. So that is a food game, and the movements are the same as in the chasing games with toy, but just on lower speed. Another important, after the food games, we introduce the toy, and we do that in both an exercise with the flirt pole and another exercise with just a toy on a rope. And this is a flirt pole exercise where we can do longer chasing, more speed, and so on. And this is where you really get a lot of fitness training for the dog. And a fully trained dog, or one of our older dogs or adult dogs, they do this for 20, 25, 30 minutes sometimes, without any breaks, every day. So it's tough training, but it helps the recovery for detection dogs. So when they get tired, they recover really quick. So that's why it's really good high intense training, and that can look like this.
All the way holding without losing the toe. Ah, yes, yes, yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh, bravo. Ah, good.
And there you saw examples of the focus that I talked about in the start, the leash tension. So the dog learns that focus means that the toy will soon move. And that principle is important not only in detection and tracking training, but in all training and in dog training in general, that the dog learns that focus pays off. But the flirt pole isn't that easy to handle as a reward. So that is something that we do to maintain and to increase the motivation of playing, and as fitness training, as I said. In a reward situation, we use another type of toy. In these videos, you will see that I'm playing with a Kong on a rope. It can be a ball on a rope, but it is a toy that makes that is possible to play chasing with. So a tug and something that you hold with both hands will more turn into social interactive play. So we want to continue to keep the dog in the prey mode by using another type of toy. And the chasing games are following the same principles that you could see in the food games and in the flirt pole, but now it's closer and more easy to handle as a reward. And here you will also see that focus is a main part of the chasing games, and also you will see some examples of leash tension. So when we have that high motivation for the toy itself, the dog can engage in the chasing for some time, then we have had the possibility to condition the leash tension. For some dogs, especially dogs that I haven't done the play development for on my own, maybe get them a little bit older, I have to normally train resistance to leash tension as a separate exercise. And I would just like to give you an example of that, because it's a very important part of where it can be really problematic if you have a dog who is too sensitive to leash tension. It will create problems not only for training, but also in a real search. So the resistance to leash tension can be done like this, where we have the dog on a leash, we play a little bit, throw the toy away, let the dog pull toward the toy, and when the dog still pulls, we kick the toy so that we reward the dog for pulling.
Bravo.
So the goal when you do this exercise is that the dog should pull all the way to the toy, and when he gets to the toy, you should feel that he continues to try and grab it. That's the level where you need to go to be able to train the indication in the best way. So when we have done this, the next step is to do search development training, and I will give you an example of that with two of my puppies. And what they do here is that I have played with them outside this room, and then I in the beginning I just throw the toy in there, and they are just go and get there, and then gradually I remove that visual stimulus so that they start to search without seeing me throwing the toy. So it's not more complicated than that. The dog goes from using the eyes to using the nose in different environments, and this is more or less environmental training in that way, and that's why we keep the task simple. It doesn't have to search in a specific way, it doesn't have to indicate, it can just go there and get his toy, and this is how you build up the motivation for searching. Now we're getting closer to the indication training, and the first next step towards that is to do the detail search. So let's now pretend that dog that you saw in the previous video can search for the toy for 20-25 minutes. So now we want to direct that motivation into more detailed search. with that, we do use smaller amounts of scents, and this is typically where you can see that people start to cut, for example, a Kong in smaller pieces. It can be anything that you just have the possibility to make the pieces and scent picture smaller and smaller, and this is how the dog develops that high sniffing intensity. We look for things like closed mouth, because the sniffing and the searching will be more effective. So we need to teach the dog that that is the technique you're going to use to be able to find the hide and get the reward. But as soon as we start to train duration, the dog finds the toy, finds the hide, and then we start to wait and train duration, then we are into indication training, and that is too early. So what we need to do first is just to reward the reaction. We want the dog to connect, to establish a quick connection between searching and finding, so that we, by using the reward, we tell the dog that that is the way we want you to search. This is how you find it. If we always end with a long indication, the dog will just think that, okay, this is just another indication exercise. And then the search intensity won't go up. So we have to do quick rewards for finding. And that is what we do up until we come to that 10-minute search, for example. When I talk about 10-minute search, in some sessions, they find several hides during that 10-15 minutes. Sometimes I start up the search with not placing a piece of placing a hide in the wall, so that the dog has to search for a long time before finding something. The size of the scent picture, if you're using, for example, a piece of Kong, the reaction that you want when the dog finds that piece of Kong is that he moves forward. If he immediately turns his head around, that means that the dog has more attention toward you and the reward than on the hide. So then you need to go up again to a bigger piece. So the rewarding the reaction can look like this. Was something with the video, but you can see it on YouTube also. But what happened there was just quick reaction. Soon as the nose is on the hide, quick reaction. And the quicker I can do that, the small reaction, the more the intensity will go up. And that's the first step. So when I can see that the dog starts to pull toward the hide when he found it and wants to stay there, that's actually the foundation for a good indication. And that I can do with using, again, the leash tension. So once I have rewarded the dog several times, as soon as he has the nose over the hide, then I can start to add some tension on the leash, just when I see the first reaction to the odor. And then I pull the leash a little bit, not much, just gently, so that the dog pulls forward, and then I reward. And by doing that, I can get even more intensity out of the search and strengthen the reaction. In indication training, that will lead to a more close and focused indication, especially if you have the plan to train a sit and stare, because sit and stare can easily be too relaxed if you haven't done enough of this exercise, because then the dog will focus more on sitting than on actually pointing out. So adding the leash tension in that reaction will give you a better indication. And it also trains the dog to really stay on the hide. And that's, of course, important. The closer we can get that distraction indication, the less he will be distracted by things happening around him. So again, the distance is important. When we do these exercises, the search development, I do it like every day, 1 or 2 sessions. In parallel to this, as soon as I have a dog who is enough motivated for the toy, then I can start doing this exercise that is called active passive. And active passive is built on the chasing games because the dog should follow the toy when it's moving, but when the toy gets still, the dog should get still. And that's where we shape the indication training. So the indication behavior. So if I plan to do train a sit and stare, the active passive is the best way to train that indication. So I start with movements over nose height and gradually go lower and lower until I'm on ground level, and keep the same sit all the way down. For older dogs, going too fast to low movements will very easily have them lying down because they have trained obedience using that movement. So we have to take it in small steps. I will show you a video of the whole process, going from over nose height to ground level. And then also in the last part of the video, you will see how we connect this search into the wall, the brick wall. And as the dog has been doing the brick wall search, the detailed search in parallel to this, they eventually meet each other, these two exercises. And that's what you will see here in this video. So that is how the process looks of the exercise called active passive. Some criteria for active passive: consistent leash pulling when you are on ground level. That's when the distance becomes important. So when you do the movements over the head and so on, you don't need to care much about the distance between the dog and the toy. But when you're on ground level, that's where you can focus more on getting the dog closer. So that's why the previous exercises are so important. So the dog doesn't stop just because you get tension on the leash. Want them to go as close as possible because that will give you better precision in the indication. Reward placement always straightforward. We flip the toy always away to keep the dog in that prey mode, not up or down, but always away. If the dog doesn't sit fast enough, we immediately add tension, take a quick step forward, and give the dog a new chance, so we don't accidentally train the dog to do a slow sit. That type of reset you do for not sitting, for slow sitting, but also for lack of focus. Immediately tighten the leash, take a quick step forward, and make the movement higher up. So when we start to connect the indication with the search, we have done search on the wall and we have done the active passive training, and now we can mix those two because it will take a while to get that solid indication and the solid connection. So what I do here is that I do a little bit of active passive beside the wall or in front of the wall, and then I mix it, and it can look like this. You will see sometimes that I'm petting the dog, I'm touching the dog's head, and that is a way to get even more focus and tension toward the toy. So there you could see that the behavior that you shaped through active passive is the same in the search. And another thing to remember is the reason for using active passive is that if we teach the dog that the only time that he's allowed to go and get the toy is when it's moving, this is how you train a really stable indication, because the hide will not move. So that makes it very reliable, that the dog knows and he will just sit there and wait for the reward to move instead of trying to grab the hide. And that can happen if you are using, if you're not consistent with the active passive principle. So what I want to say with that is that as soon as you start to train active passive, always kick the toy or flip it or something to keep it moving. Because if you now and then just let the dog for example, using a reward signal and grab it when it's still on the ground. That will give the dog a memory of grabbing the toy when it's still, and that can lead to problems in the indication. So it's a very, very important principle. And this is the reason why we are using it, because we are training dogs for searching for things that might be very dangerous if they touch them. And using the active passive with the prey drive as a basic foundation for it is clearly very effective to get the stability. Adjusting the distance will be important sometimes, especially when we're searching for things that are very small or diffuse scent pictures. And the tools that we have created during the chasing games and so on, leash tension, the touching, gives us that possibility to adjust the distance and get the right distance before we reward. You could see that I did that in the search, also touching the dog sometimes, so the dog moves forward and then I reward. Because the closer we get them, the better precision. And since we have done active passive, there will not be a risk for the dog touching or biting on the hide. That never happens when we train it like this. A stand and stare. I would say that the problem that I have with stand and stare compared to sit and stare is that the sit and stare is a more of an active decision that the dog has to take before he decides to indicate. Remember that the indication is actually are two things. One, the first part of the indication is that at some point the dog will stop to search because he gets, he found it. And then at that point he will stop to search and then perform that indication behavior that he's been trained to do. So you have to look at both of those. When the dog stops searching, where the dog stops searching is most likely where at least he thinks that the source is. That's valuable information. And the other thing is the indication behavior itself, which will tell you that the dog made the decision of indicating and telling you that he found something. Many dogs have this tendency to freeze, and especially some of the detection dogs that we use, some of the breeds, Spaniels and Labradors and so on, their natural tendency very often is to just freeze. And that can be a problem, of course, to if you also want to stand and stare, because the dog might stand and stare just because he got a little bit insecure. But once you have trained him to sit and stare, he has to make a more active decision. So that's why I prefer a sit and stare if you have trained it in a way that gives you the precision, because a badly trained sit and stare can, like I said, not be precise enough. So you have to do all the preparations that I explained to get a really good sit and stare. A stand and stare feels for me like not a complete, a fully trained indication. One thing that I explained was this decision-making thing. The other thing is that for some dogs, when they are standing, they start to move their paws a little bit. So it's more of a risk that they start to be active during indication. With sit and stare, even though you want them close, you still get a safe distance, because when they sit, automatically they will move their nose a little bit away. So that's another good thing. Another problem with stand and stare can sometimes be if it's dark, for example, that it can be difficult for the handler to see if the dog indicates or if he's just standing there analyzing in the track, for example. Again, sit and stare is easier to read. But when I train a stand and stare, I don't use the active passive principle. Then I actually shape it straight on the wall using this principle, where I gradually train duration in small steps. I just prolong that reaction, and I use the leash tension to get the stability. The same type of reward, direct reward, to keep the dog in that prey mode, rewarding forward. So yeah, that's the principle that I use to train a stand and stare. It's just integrated in the search development training on the wall. But you still need to do the search development before that, and you need to have the resistance to leash tension. When I use food as an indication training, I would say that the when I recommend it, I do it if I see that the dog has no interest at all in the toy and playing, and that it will not be possible or easy enough to develop it, then I can recommend food. But I rarely use it for my own dogs in detection training or tracking training, because I want the focus and the drive that I can get through play if I do it in a focused and good way. But if I use food, a way that I can increase the intensity, even though it is food, instead of just dropping with low intensity, I try to speed up the reward frequency. And in this exercise with the puppy here, I use a lid where I place the piece of food under, so that I immediately get the attention toward the article itself. And then I quickly charge a new piece of food under the lid while the dog is eating. And by doing that, I can increase the intensity just by increasing the frequency. And then you will see in this video that I gradually go from using the lid to a smaller article, and then in the end I connect it with a short search. My recommendation is that even if you're using this principle and this technique to train the indication, I would still try to use a toy reward to get the stronger reward in the end of the process. Because when you put this in, let's say, a track, for example, then that motivation for indicating still has to compete with that often very high motivation for tracking. So then the dog can start pass over the articles and stop to indicate on them. And that's the reason why we need a higher intense reward normally also for those dogs. So there you could see going from high reward frequency to with the lid to dropping and gradually lower the intensity. But the first part where you have a high frequency is really important to give the dog less distractions. The higher frequency, the less distracted the dog will be, because he will be busy to get the rewards. So indications should be a learned behavior, not something that the dog has to or not using like a natural response to something, but actually to do a learned behavior, which again will make this active decision part, which will make the indication more reliable. The odor and nothing more should be the signal. So think about your own position when you train the indication. It's very easy to end up in front of the dog all the time, but stay behind so that you can deliver the reward without the dog looking at you. And also, it has to be fully trained before you connect it with a search. So if you train active passive, you have to do the whole process before you connect the two of them, because otherwise you will train too many things at the same time. And indication training, indication is always two parts. Like I explained before, it's stop to search at some point, and that will be affected by the level of search development that you have done with the dog, and the trained indication. And you need to pay attention to both of them. Common problems: too big distance to the hide, which leads to lack of precision. Again, it can be caused by lack of drive, too little play development, but also when you condition the tools, leash tension, touching the dog through the play development, you will be able to solve those problems. An unbalance between the indication or the hide and the reward. So that comes from using too small scent pictures too early. Continue to use large scent pictures in the beginning to get them more focused towards the search area, so that you can deliver the reward without drawing the attention away. How much thinking? I was talking about shaping mode, and the reason why I don't use markers or reward signals in the training, especially not release signal. The reason for this, there are many reasons for it, but one of them is that when I use them, and I use it a lot in my training, in obedience and bite work and so on, but that's also the reason why I don't use it in detection and tracking, because I want the dog to respond to the odor automatically, just like a reflex. But when I use my reward signal, I put the dog in a shaping mode where I want him to think and to try. And that's not what I want in a dog who indicates on explosives, for example. So it tends to put the dog in that shaping mode, which makes them try things to get that signal. And that actually is something that can happen after a while. So be careful with using those, because the previous learning history might affect the result quite quick. So think about what's my dog's previous experience from this signal, and will it interfere with what I want in the indication? The other thing is that one of the most common problems in detection training is hectic, frantic dogs running. And when you use a release signal in connection to your reward, you want, at least I want that signal to be, stop what you're doing, go and get your reward. So I will have that very intense reaction and running towards the handler. So I'm not only building up the attention towards me as a handler with using that release signal, but I also build up the expectation of running. So I want instead the possibility to deliver the reward by throwing during basic training. And of course, we don't throw when it's an explosive device. But at that point, when we have started to do the imprinting, we have several other ways of rewarding the dog. And one of them can be to go to the dog, put the leash on, and then deliver the reward a little bit from the side, and then take the dog away from the hide, so that we don't need to throw anymore, but we still keep the same reward delivery, the same direction of the reward. So the dog knows that the reward will always be delivered in front, sometimes throwing, sometimes just hand it over, but never behind. So I've seen several really scary accidents with dogs who runs away from the hide. A few of them have been when the dog has been high up, indicating on something, and jumped down, meeting the handler. And I've seen dogs seriously wounded and actually put to sleep. They broke every bone in their body. So thinking that it is safer to have a dog running away from the hide is basically not true. I've also seen a dog respond to the reward signal, kicking the hide with the back legs. So the most important thing is that the dog is still and that he stays on the hide until I go there and get him. Or if I train, like we call a safe recall, or using tapping on the leash to make them turn around and walk safely away. But that's not what I want from my reward signal. So eventually, I want the same indication in all different situations, even if it's high up. And even if the dog is not able to sit, I at least want to see that he has that he tries to sit. So I think it's easy for the dog to understand if you have one behavior instead of letting the dog decide whether he should sit or stand or lie down. Just imagine if you did the same in obedience. You say sit to the dog, but it's up to him if he wants to lie down or stand or sit. But if it's only one response always, it will be a quicker learning curve and easier for the dog and more clear for the dog to understand. So this is an example of a sit and stare higher up. And that's also an example of a hide or position where you don't want the dog to jump down in the concrete floor. So always go there, bring the dog down, put the leash on or whatever, so that you have the dog under control when you deliver the reward. When I have all the foundations and the indication done, I use the same for tracking. And this is the final video showing that the foundations that I do for the detection dogs are exactly the same for tracking, and especially for hard surface tracking. And yeah, the process saves you time. So thank you for listening. The recording will be sent out to you, and you will have access to it for around 2 weeks. If you're interested in more in-depth instructions on the sit and stare, we now have launched a course, an online course on how to train a sit and stare, where we go into details about the different steps and when I show with different dogs. Yeah, you can find it on our website. Thank you very much, and good luck with your training.